Yeah, we'll take questions, Brian.
Can you say when the dual mandate might result in different interest rate calls than focus on inflation targeting alone?
It's always going to be conditional on the issues. I would say in general times it should not make too large a difference, because we're always considering short-term volatility in employment and output when thinking about interest rate decisions. But there can be times, for example, an economic shock or extreme business cycle moments where you have to really trade off short-term inflation versus employment and work through. You can have one extreme, which is one that we lived through in this country in the 70s, which was stagflation, where inflation was rising as was unemployment. And that's where the price stability weight was much higher than the employment. But vice versa, during economic shocks, negative shocks, inflation, monetary policy has shown an enormous ability to stabilise economies globally, for example, through the GFC.
And I'll just add to that too, Brian, as I'm sure you know, other jurisdictions who have a dual or mixed mandate make these judgments at each occasion and have for many, many years, and it's on the basis that Mr Orr has just mentioned.
But given that the labour market is a cyclical laggard, is this focus, even if it's only about communication, on the state of the labour market, increase the risk that you'll get behind the curve and have a bigger cycles and output interest rates?
No, we would always, I mean, it is what is always happening as today. There are many, many indicators, most of them are coincident, very few are forward-looking, most are lagging, and those are the judgments that the Reserve Bank has been making for many, many years.
Bernard.
Where do you think maximum sustainable employment is at the moment, and do you expect that an actual level would ever be named in a policy paper agreement, like inflation is named?
I might just start before the Governor designate comes in there. We've been very clear from the moment we announced this direction of travel that we wouldn't be seeking the bank through the PTA or any other means to aim for a specific target. That in fact is one of the reasons for the language that we're using here. The government itself has a target. Our target is to reduce unemployment to 4% within our first term in office. But we recognise that there are a number of factors, a number of policies that influence that. So we're not asking the bank to come up with a specific target within the way that they determine what maximum sustainable employment is. As the Governor designate has said, there are many indicators. The exercise the bank will now go through, and they are obliged to by the PTA, is to describe to us how they are working that out, what considerations they're putting in place, and that will be published within the monetary policy statement as indicated in the PTA.
I think you've answered it. Yeah.
I beg your pardon? Well, that's what the bank will now do, is decide what they will use, what indicators they will use to define what maximum sustainable employment is. And as I say, in the next policy target, in the next monetary policy statement, they are required to describe that process and show what they have used, what indicators they have used. The government has the job of reaching the 4% target. What we have said all along is we want every aspect of our economic apparatus to be playing a role in that. Monetary policy has a role in that, but so do all of the other labour market policies that the government undertakes.
Yes, well, thank you, Minister. I think you've answered it very well, but just you have to realise that the maximum sustainable employment it's a dynamic concept. And it's also quite a broad concept. And I mean it's dynamic in the sense that there's not only demand considerations for work, both domestic and international, but there are a lot of supply considerations around willingness and capability and skill levels to work. And so there are many, many aspects outside of monetary policy that we will need to consider, and through time, maximum sustainable employment will be a dynamic statistic, which is why there is no target.
Do you think we're at maximum sustainable employment at the moment?
I'd say that we are running a very, very healthy economy at the moment. The work is underway at the Reserve Bank, and I'd like to be able to better elaborate on that at the next monetary policy statement.
How does the government feel about Treasury officials sitting on interest rate?
Sorry, did you say out of the government or the Governor?
I believe an open and transparent decision-making environment is very, very necessary. So the committee structure is fantastic. The fact that the Treasury are there as observers and only observers is very healthy. You know, the bank remains independent. To have confidence in your independence, you should be open and allow people to put views on the table or listen or share exchange. So the Treasury are there, I believe, to better assist the coordination of monetary and fiscal policy, but it's the Monetary Policy Committee that has to make the decisions.
So are you supportive, and if you are supportive, perhaps the finance minister elaborate on this debate that was had about whether...
Yeah, look, I can, Hamish, and both the independent panel and the Reserve Bank themselves did not favour there being a Treasury observer as we went through the process, but I wouldn't describe it as a violent opposition. It was more around the question of whether or not they thought what the value of it and the use of it. The government's made a decision that there is value in it for exactly the reasons that the governor's just outlined, that we want to see better understanding, mutual understanding between the bank and Treasury about fiscal and monetary policy. So healthy disagreement about what I regard as a relatively minor matter in the greater scheme of what we're announcing today.
So was one of the concerns that it would stifle the decision-making process and stifle what?
Not particularly, no. It was more around assessing what the value would be. I think the important thing here is that the decision makers are the members of the Monetary Policy Committee. In the case of what I'm planning, the 4 internals and the 3 externals. The Treasury's participation, it's a representative role, an observer role. I don't believe that there will be any issue whatsoever. And again, I fall back to the fact that this is done in other jurisdictions and works well. And we want to make sure we have the most robust decision-making process we possibly can have. As I say, I don't regard the difference of opinion about this matter as being at all material. Sorry, Bernard.
Will the Treasury representative be reporting back to their boss, if you like, the Minister?
No, not particularly, but actually I don't think that really matters in the sense that the minutes of meetings will be published. Any decision making that has to take place beyond consensus will be acknowledged. So actually anything that happens in the committee will be a matter of public record in any case.
Will the external members of the committee be free to give speeches that might indicate their views and how they might be different from the committee?
No, they will not. The governor of the committee will be the sole spokesperson on the decisions, or the governor of the bank will be the sole spokesperson on the decisions of the committee. The way in which that operates is what's to be developed through the charter. So the charter is a document that will be negotiated between the MPC and myself, and that will define the way in which the behaviour of those members is worked out. It will act a bit like a code of conduct to ensure that all members are able to do that.
So you muzzling the rest of them?
No, far from it. They will be playing a very important role in making the decision, but it's not helpful for anybody, for all members of the committee to be giving speeches or going out and saying things. We want there to be a consistent voice on the decisions of the committee, and that will be the chair of the committee, who will be the governor. Those external members, I'm sure when they sign up to the charter, will understand the importance of that, and equally the importance of the contribution they'll make.
But why not allow them to talk in public like they do in Australia and the UK, where that seems to be also seen as transparent and functional?
Yeah, look, we've made the decision that we want there to be a single spokesperson on the decisions of the committee. These are human beings. They will have other roles in their lives where I'm sure they'll be talking publicly about the things they care about. What we're talking about here specifically are the decisions of the MPC that are the prerogative of the governor to communicate.
What sort of people will you be looking for to be the external members?
We're not limiting ourselves to just those who are monetary policy experts. The bankers are monetary policy experts. What we'll be looking for among the externals is people who can help with the implementation of the new objectives, so to have a wide view around the real economy, how it operates, as well as a good understanding obviously of the role of monetary policy. So we're looking for people who can fulfil a pretty broad mandate. I've got great confidence, to preempt what might be the next question, that there are people in New Zealand who can fulfil these roles. I don't think the cringe that went with, for instance, the creation of the Supreme Court needs to be taken up here. We have people who work in New Zealand who are knowledgeable about the economy, knowledgeable about monetary policy, who I think will be excited about serving in these roles.
To what extent will those appointments take into account Labor's general policies on diversity, and also with most of your appointments you've ensured that you have representation, for example, from the union movement?
Yeah, people will not be playing a representative role in the committee, so it's not a question of someone representing a particular sector or group in society. It'll be merit-based, it'll be based around the skills that they've got, and I'm sure we'll be able to find people who reflect the diversity of New Zealand who have those skills.
Will a previous career in politics rule anyone out?
It'll be merit-based, which you might, Jenna, suggest would rule out people who've had a career in politics. I don't know.
In November's monetary policy statement, former acting governor said that there is a risk of the policy committee turning into a bit of a circus, given there could be a range of different views. And I was just wondering, how concerned are you that this might transpire?
Well, that relates to some of the questions that we were answering before around communications. I believe the acting governor in that instance was referring to the question of there being multiple voices. We are dealing with that by the fact that the governor will be the sole spokesperson on the decisions of the committee. I reject a more generalised interpretation of that. This will strengthen the decision-making process for monetary policy. It will have the opposite effect, I believe, of anyone who says that the wider approach would be as it's characterised there.
I think you said...
Sorry, Jenny?
Where there are dissenters, you wouldn't publish the
names. Yeah.
So how does that square with publishing the minutes? Surely the minutes will show who dissented.
The minutes will show. That's on the votes, Jenny. The minutes will show discussion. The minutes will show if it gets to the point of a vote, what the vote was. It's the names of those who vote that wouldn't be published.
Won't that be obvious from the minutes?
Well, again, when you look to other jurisdictions, you might well say that, but it won't be attributed in that way. I think the important point here is that we are aiming to achieve consensus. If you look around the world to places where votes are possible, it is very, very rare for votes to happen, and that would be my expectation here, but you have to have a process in place in the instance that does occur.
So the minutes won't actually be accurate transcripts of what was said inside the room. They'll be more broad and sanitised statements.
Well, that's to be worked through as we deal with the Charter. That's exactly what the Charter is for, is to be able to define that. My expectation is that it will give people a very accurate idea of the tone of discussion, the direction of travel. In talking to the markets when we were going through this process, it's clear that that's the information that's valued, is the tone of discussion, the direction of travel. We can do that, I am very confident, without having to go into the individual names of individual people.
And on the dissent that will be reflected in the minutes.
Correct.
The PTA, you've kept the focus on the 2% midpoint of the target range. The bank's managed to hit a 2% inflation rate in 1 quarter since that midpoint was explicitly made in 2012. Could I ask both of you whether you would expect the bank to have a better hit record in the coming 5 years on the 2%?
I'll leave that for you, Adrian.
I'll be pleased if we can keep inflation low and stable like the bank has done over the last decade or so. Monetary policy is an inexact science. That's why we have a range, and that's why it's forward-looking, and that's why it's flexible. One hopes that we are close to the midpoint. I believe that's exactly where the Reserve Bank has been over the last decade.
Could ask both yourself and the Minister, do you think monetary policy was run too tight in the last 5 years or so in a way that meant maximum sustainable employment wasn't reached?
I'm hesitant to go there, as you know, Bernard, because finance ministers commenting specifically on these things it can cause some difficulty. But I'm on the record previously as saying it is possible to have foreseen a different outcome in 2014 than what we had under this arrangement. Equally, as the Governor-designate said before, you can find a scenario where the other direction would be possible. That's the nature of this. My job as the Minister of Finance is to set the framework and the criteria, and we believe by doing it explicitly, putting employment in there gives ourselves the ability to to have monetary policy play its part in the real economy in a more explicit way than we've done before. That's my goal. Specific decisions ultimately are for the Governor at the time that they're made.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what the word sustainable means?
I just think Bernard wouldn't mind Adrian answering that, and then we'll go back to
I'm sorry, Bernard, I don't have a view. I haven't sat and done any of that genius of hindsight analysis.
It's sustainable. What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, well, look, the main thing there was to say, to be able to come up with a form of words that expressed our long-term objective, short and long-term objectives for employment. It was to ensure that we reflected the idea that both of us have spoken about today, that there are many different measures, there are many different indicators, and that what we're looking for is the ability for people to have work, but for that work to be created and generated in a way that supports the overall objectives.
Is it a signal to the bank to, when in doubt, and there's clearly doubt or uncertainty band about any estimate of the natural rate, to err on the side of easy?
Oh no, I wouldn't say that necessarily. I mean, that's what the bank will now work through as it develops up its the detail of the decision making. It was more about ensuring that we got across the fact that we want maximum employment. We want that employment to be employment that is sustainable over the long term. That's also sustainable within the framework of decision making. We've been very clear that the two objectives sit there alongside each other. The bank, as other central banks who have mandates like this, will balance those at different points in the cycle.
You said that you briefed Amy Adams just around this and that you were hoping for consensus all the way through. Does that mean that she supported the changes?
Well, look, I won't put words in her mouth, but she appreciated the briefing. There's a select committee process that the Act changes will go through, which will enable her and other members of Parliament to explore any issues or concerns that they have. But she certainly appreciated the briefing, appreciated understanding where we're coming from.
Could I ask both of you whether you think maximum sustainable employment has, over recent years, increased as new technology has come in and all sorts of changes with migration have come through? Do you think that could change over time, and has it changed over recent years?
I think that's the very point the Governor-designate was making, that it is a dynamic thing. And even how we measure employment in terms of the Household Labour Force Survey and the relationship of that with technology, all of those things are evolving. Has it increased? Look, the jury's out. Will it in the future? I think is a really relevant question as technological change starts to have a greater impact on employment levels. But that's the very reason why we have a process for the bank to be able to show through the monetary policy statements how it's interpreting those words. We'll take one more if there's one more.
You make a change.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
I believe the Minister answered it exactly as I would have. It's a dynamic concept. It's something that every New Zealander should hope for, that we are gainfully employed at our maximum level. But that is really a function of so many different factors going on in the economy, both some within our control, some outside. I'm very, very pleased with the economic state of New Zealand over recent years.
Last one from Gina.
If you change the way that you measure employment, will it have any effect on these new targets?
Well, over time, that's the work that will go on as the bank looks at the various indicators of employment and unemployment. It will work out how that feeds into the notion of maximum sustainable employment. This is definitely a dynamic indicator. For us, the important thing that we're doing today is ensuring that monetary policy takes into account its role in the real economy. That's the big difference we wanted to make, was to make sure that understanding the limits of monetary policy, what can it do to contribute? Clearly, inflation control, price stability is vitally important. We also believe ensuring that we have a focus on maximising the number of people in employment, reducing unemployment. The government's got its goals on that. We're simply asking the bank today to play its part in doing that.
Sorry, just to follow up, is that partly why you haven't set a target, because of the change in measurement?
It's that the change in measurement issue is not is one small factor in a wide range of factors about the dynamic nature of this. I think that's the point that Bernard was making, that as technological change advances, what we consider to be employment at any given moment will change, and that's the nature of this. The agreement we've signed today and the legislation gives flexibility for us to be able to manage that dynamic environment.
Just one last statement. Brian, just back to your question, there will be no inflation bias to decision making. We remain focused on the 2% midpoint of the target, and today is about us being explicit and as transparent as we can be as to how we've made those decisions and around what the impact is on the real economy, including employment.
Thank you, everyone.